Well, hey, howdy, hey. I am welcome to Memo Chat. I am Blake Martin. With me is Dr. Thomas Karakolis. I can actually say your name if I slow down a little bit. And hey, Thomas, how are you?
Good, good. I was just thinking actually about a joke I was going to tell about you opening these up with "Hey, howdy, ho, ho," and because you did it, you stole my joke. But thanks, Blake. Appreciate
Wow,
that, man.
wow, wow.
This is
Uh,
gonna be this is gonna be a feisty one today.
I think I can feel the feistiness. I can feel the feistiness. Thomas is a little spicy.
I'm
Um,
excited.
so Thomas, and speaking of spicy, we're talking about something that's a little bit hot, and it's want to talk about repetitive stress injuries or repetitive strain disorders. Um, and it's something that you examine sometimes in your research and stuff like that, and that you certainly looked at during your doctoral work. What is a repetitive stress injury or a repetitive strain disorder?
That's a great question, Blake. Um, I guess to put it in simplest terms, it's when you keep doing the same thing over and over again, and it causes an injury. So, injury being defined as some sort of disruption to a biological tissue that causes pain or a lack of ability to perform. That doesn't really necessarily mean much to the casual person. I understand that. So, to give an example, um, if you're continuing to do lifting tasks at work, let's say you have a job where you
Right?
do a lot of lifting, you're probably going to get I don't want to say probably, but actually it's true. The majority of people that do repetitive lifting types of tasks end up with a bad back or chronic back, low back pain, let's say. And the reason that happens is because they just keep doing the same thing over and over again to the tissues like that make up their spine. So we're talking about the muscles, the ligaments, the intervertebral discs. Um, and ultimately, that leads those tissues to maybe not necessarily completely fail, but they become damaged, and you either experience pain if there are nerve cells in the area, or you can't keep doing what you've been doing. So, an analogy that a lot of people in the biomechanics community like to use for this is it's like how you would break a clothes hanger. How would you break a clothes hanger, Blake?
Just bend it back and forth and back and
E-
forth and back and forth and back and forth,
Exactly.
and it gets weak and bendy.
So if you're doing that with your spine, think of your spine as bending back and forth. And the more you keep doing that, the more likely you are to end up causing damage to the tissues in the back of your spine. And the more likely you get stuff like intervertebral disc herniation or just any sort of disc degeneration that would potentially lead to chronic pain. So I hope that kind of describes what we're talking about. Now, this doesn't have to necessarily do with lifting tasks, overhead type work. Same thing can happen in your
Right.
shoulder or your arms. Um, Sedentary work, even if you're just sitting. The analogy for that one is kind of like how you would break a piece of gum, where you just start pulling on it, and you don't have to pull on it any harder, but it just keeps stretching and stretching.
Right.
So it just in your back do the same thing. So most types of jobs where there's a repetitive nature to it, if you don't have that right work to rest balance, where you allow your body to recover, there is a potential to get a repetitive strain injury that could turn into a chronic type situation for
Oh,
you.
okay. So I want to go back on something that you said there. So you're
Yeah.
doing this thing over and over again. So how does that differ, say, from like exercise, like running 10 kilometers or something that's supposed to be healthy for you? So you're using your muscles and you're working them over and over again so that you can build endurance. How does a repetitive stress injury, how does that differ from an exercise thing? And where's the line between health and injury?
Well, so this can happen in exercise as well. It's the exact same injury mechanism, and so it's the line between health and injury is what we're really interested in. And we honestly we don't know a lot of stuff about this still, but we do know enough to start making some practical recommendations and creating guidelines. And I think what your question is getting at, and I know you know the answers to these, Blake, but it's a great question nonetheless. Um, we're looking to try and find that balance where So think about like working out in the gym, and what you're doing is you're basically lifting heavy weights that are causing a little bit of micro damage into your muscles. And then there are cells that come in, and there's a vasculature response where blood rushes to the area. There's a bunch of stuff going on inside your body that ends up repairing the damage and making it stronger. And
Right.
that's how we become stronger, by exercising and working out. We can do that at work as well.
Sure.
It's quite possible, and it happens in some injuries. And there are people that go their entire career. If you think of people that work in a warehouse where they're lifting boxes their entire career, and there are men and women who can do that, and they never become injured, and they actually become stronger. And so it's finding that balance between work and rest so that you can recover, where um, it goes from being healthy to being injurious. So when we exercise, we target to try and find that area where we can improve our tissue's capacity, or our body's capacity to do the work that we want it to do. A lot of times in workplaces, we have external factors on us that we don't have when we're casually exercising. Athletes, elite level athletes especially, and professional athletes, they do have some of these external factors that occupations have, and that's why you see higher levels of injuries usually in those populations. But in an occupation, you're required to do your job, and your job's not always tailored to fit that right work to rest ratio depending on what you're doing.
Right. So like if you're waiting tables and you've got to carry that heavy tray and it's got like lots of drinks or lots of food on. I mean, it's not happening right now, but in pre and post COVID environment, no, you're carrying that heavy load, and or if you're a delivery driver or whatever, and you're picking up that same box over and over again the same way, and maybe not being biomechanically efficient or whatever, like you're maybe compromising or reaching over something to do it in an improper way. So you could just by that constant loading, actually, you could damage yourself. Or if you do it really well and take the time to rest and to recuperate, then you're saying that it could actually lead you to being stronger.
Yeah, so and you hit on some really good points there, and the theme of what you were saying is essentially the complexity of this problem is that the reason why it's so hard to find these work to rest ratios for everybody is because there's so much biological diversity.
Right.
So, like you said, depending on how let's use the waiter or waitress example, whatever. Let's say waiter, just for the sake of argument. He's carrying this tray around every day at work, and he's bringing drinks to people. Um, there's some waiters that can do it, and then you would have a similar waiter who can't do it, and they'll become injured. And why is that? Is essentially the crux of what you're getting at. One reason could be how they're doing it. So the one waiter could be holding the drink tray a little higher, lower, and let's say the shoulder, for sake of argument, is
Yeah.
what's becoming injured. Um, if one waiter is holding it higher, the other waiter is holding it lower, one will become injured, the other won't. But that's not the only factor, and you kind of
Right.
touched on this. There's also um, their biology, and some people naturally just have stronger tissues than others. It could be from their genetic makeup, but it also could be from their youth, and their the period in their life before they reach skeletal maturity, where they just develop stronger tissues because of what they did. And
Right.
if you engage in these healthy activities, you will develop stronger and healthier tissues.
So my son is a really good example here because, like, I mean, he's a guy who's kind of like he's just naturally athletic, like that's the way he is. But he was working as a bartender in New Zealand for about a year, and while he was doing that, he started getting tendonitis in his bicep from shaking, from doing the cocktail shaking. And he said, and he was also getting problems in his neck and in his jaw. And he was talking with another bartender who told him to stand differently, to bend his knees slightly, to squat down, and to hold the jar at a different, like the shaker jar at a different level, and the shaker glass at a different
Hmm.
level, and to kind of do a slightly different motion. And he said the tendonitis in his arm disappeared when he did it. And so it wasn't like he didn't actually, like his body didn't change. He wasn't a different person suddenly, but it was the way that he was doing the thing. It got like he found a technique that was more biomechanically efficient. Actually, he said he was able to shake faster because one of the things you're trying to do when you're shaking is you're trying to break that ice up within the glass, and so he was able to more efficiently break up the ice. So I guess he was in kind of to say it, he was finding the right way for him, for his
Yeah,
body, for his variation to do it.
and I really like that example that you actually just gave because that does show a perfect example of biomechanical compensation. The one thing I just kind of do want to touch on is that I don't necessarily know if we want to venture into that space of biomechanical efficiency. Efficiency is generally a really tough word to
Right, right.
define,
Good point.
and I don't know if Jacob was doing it more efficiently necessarily, or he just found a way to do it healthier for him. So
Right.
I might try and change your language a little bit
Yeah.
when you do say that. But very good point. And I'm glad that I'm assuming he doesn't have tendonitis anymore. I'm hoping he's
Not
healthy.
currently. Not
Good,
currently.
good. So yeah, no, I'm really glad then. So that's kind of a win story, and that shows that how you can biomechanically compensate. And another huge point I think that you brought up that I don't think we can neglect, and I'd like to emphasize, is you can do the same task, but if you change something that seems to be peripheral to the task, it can actually change how you perform it. So when you said he moved his feet,
Yeah.
in, intuitively, a lot of people will think, okay, I'm shaking a glass. Why does it matter where my feet are? But we have a kinematic chain, we call it in the biomechanics community. And that basically means that all the segments of our body are linked together. And how we perform a task isn't necessarily only related to the parts of your body, so your hands and your arms that are performing a shaking task. It's also how you set up your legs and your body. So
So the
that was a great example.
does the kinematic chain always go from the floor up, or can it does it depend on like kind of what the fixed point is? So if I'm hanging on to like I don't know, let's say I'm an acrobat and I'm hanging on to the trapeze, is that where the kinematic chain starts? Or like I,
It's a philosophical question you're asking right now. It depends on how you want to think of it. So um, you can do in biomechanics we have what are called top down models or bottom up models. So the basic difference is you're looking at what your fixed point is versus your free end or your loaded end, depending
yeah,
on how. So let's use your trapeze example. It's it would still be a um, a top down or bottom up model, but the top and bottom are going to be in different places
right.
because the trapezist, is that, am I saying that correctly?
the trape the
Trapezist,
the trapezotomist.
trapeze. Like trapezius is a muscle too, though, so it's really like
The trapezer, the
the
trap
trapezer. Okay.
the trapezoid.
Anyway, he or she's gonna be holding on to the bar. I
Yeah,
don't know anything about tra-
trapeze, the trapeze
trapeze.
itself.
Yeah, the trapeze. And so that, and then their legs are going to be free. So you can think of the model going from the legs down to the hands in that case, so
Right.
the free end to the fixed end, or bottom up would be from the hands, which are fixed, to the legs. And then that's how you would calculate all the loading in the body and then decide what the best or worst way of doing that task would be for that person.
Okay. So that we've kind of said a lot, and before I don't want to get too down a rabbit hole or anything like that, but I want to ask, like, how would you know if you were like if you didn't go to a doctor, what would be a guess that what would be a thing that would make you say, ah, I've got some kind of repetitive strain disorder? I mean, obviously, if you're experiencing pain, you should go see a doctor and figure out what it is. But what might be a cue that you should go see that doctor?
Yeah, the idea would be how you would define chronic or the difference between discomfort and pain, because anyone that goes to a the gym to work out or exercise is for health knows that some level of discomfort or pain actually is good. That's showing that you've done a little bit of damage to
Is
your
pain
tissue.
good or is
I don't
discomfort
know if
good?
pain's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So and that again, it's that definition between or the difference between where pain ends and where discomfort starts or
I
vice
think
versa.
this is a good one for another memo chat. I think this
Yeah,
would
I
be a good
do.
discussion, the difference between pain and discomfort. But so, anyways, at some point, there's this difference between discomfort and pain that you're saying.
Yeah, and then when it becomes chronic is I think when you have a real problem and that's something and so the idea of how long is chronic is that because sometimes discomfort even let's say can last for a few days or a few weeks
Right,
after I wouldn't say a few weeks, but more than a week after you've done something in a healthy way. But it's when you start looking on the time scale of weeks or months and this isn't going away, that's when
right.
you know you have a really big problem. On that note, I do like the idea of exploring in a future week the difference between pain and discomfort.
Yeah. So the way that I sometimes do it with my students is I talk about acute injuries as being kind of up to 6 days. It's a thing that happens suddenly, and then it kind of has a duration of about 6 days.
Hmm.
Unless it's a fracture, and then or a more serious tear like a grade 2 or grade 3 tear. But your basic little tear in your muscle, it's going to be brief. Basic little sprain, it's going to be fairly brief. And then chronic is when it's kind of like a lot of times with chronic stuff, you don't see it coming on. Someone asks you, when did this start hurting? And you go, oh, jeepers. I
It's
don't
been
know.
so long I can't remember
Or,
it.
or you'll say, I don't know, maybe back in September or something. And you kind of like you get kind of a month. Whereas with like a muscle tear, you go, oh yeah, I was lifting that day and suddenly I felt it go and I suddenly had pain. Right, like so, acute injuries are really quite sudden, whereas the chronic stuff it kind of comes on, it creeps on slowly, where it gets a little bit worse and a little bit worse and a little bit worse and a little bit worse until it's really quite unbearable. And then, like with tendinoses and things like that, you have like that's where the tendon is really swollen or in some kind of way or inflamed or damaged.
Hmm.
Then you have this whole thing where um, it's you it's it varies. Like it hurts a little bit at the beginning of the activity and then it goes away, or it hurts only during the activity and then it hurts only after the activity, or it hurts all the time. So the kind of hurting all the time thing, that's a really good sign that things have gone pretty far down the whole
Yeah,
line, right?
yeah. I
So
think those are some also very fair definitions that you touched on. In the interest of time, we might want to wrap this up, but I do think you've opened up, or we together have opened up a whole bunch of different discussions that we can really dig down deeper into in the coming weeks.
but before we go,
Yep,
you've
I
got
love this. Before we go, yeah.
this is what I want to ask you, and this is really important. um, what do I do if I've got this kind of pain that's that every time I use my keyboard or every time I use my mouse or every time I just kind of do those bicep curls, I have this incredible pain afterwards for several hours, and it's just should what should I do?
So the short answer to that is stop doing it. There's a good quote saying that what is the definition of insanity is to continue doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So that's the short answer. I think for a longer answer, it might be something we want to explore in
Yeah.
a future discussion.
So first of all, repetitive strain, as you said, is this kind of injury that's like bending a wire back and forth or pulling a rope back and forth through a hole until it gets all frayed. And then, you bend that wire and over again, and eventually it develops instabilities and fractures in the material itself.
Mhm.
And then you know it because it's pain, and it's pain that sticks around for a while, right? Is that
That's
fair to
correct.
say?
That is a fair
and
definition, I
then
think.
and then the right thing to do if you've got some kind of a repetitive strain disorder or something like that is the short answer is stop doing that activity at least for some period of time.
Exactly. Now sometimes it's hard to identify what's causing your repetitive strain injury or disorder, so it's not an easy solution. But yes, conceptually, that's exactly it.
Okay. Um, there's lots more that we could say about
I
this, but we've
know.
kind of we kind of opened up this whole can. I think we're going to have to come back to this next week, and
I agreed.
yeah, and we can talk a little bit more. I think that there's going to be a part two to this. Anyways, thanks so much,
Perfect.
Thomas, for
Oh, thank you,
talking to me
Blake.
about this today. That was
Yeah,
awesome.
great chat. Okay,
Okay,
talk to you soon.
cheers.
Bye.
Bye.